Last week I watched a 2020 horror movie that was so bad,
I grew up in San Francisco.
I'm convinced that they just threw it away back in 2018 and pulled it back out of the trash 2 years later because thanks to COVID, the movie industry had nothing else to produce. And for that reason, I was hesitant to try another 2020 horror movie. I gave in and tried one anyway, and I'm really happy I did. Come Play is about a boy who's stalked by an evil creature living inside of his cell phone. It's far from perfect. There are a lot of problems, and we'll get to those, but for the most part, this is a solid horror movie with a clever premise and some really satisfying jump scares. It was written and directed by Jacob Chase, who back in 2017 made a short film called Larry, which has basically the same premise. He spent a few years developing the idea and turned it into a full-length movie. Now, when I popped in the DVD, I was actually surprised to see the Amblin logo. I always associated this with Steven Spielberg and family-friendly movies, and I was surprised to see it in a horror movie. The main character is a young boy named Oliver. He's autistic and he doesn't speak, so he has to depend on his cell phone to communicate.
The answer is 8.
He also spends a lot of time on his cell phone watching SpongeBob.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
Which means the creature gets to spend a lot of time watching him. And that's where a lot of the creep factor comes into this movie. The fact that it's so relatable. We're all guilty at some point of spending too much time looking at screens, scrolling through Facebook, Netflix, YouTube. So the idea that something evil is inside watching us is effective. It also reminds me of that documentary, The Social Dilemma. If you've ever seen that, you might notice some similarities. How the phone takes on like a personality of its own and watches you from behind the screen. The creature in this movie learns to communicate with Oliver through his app, and he tells him that he wants to be his friend.
I am Larry. I just want to be your friend.
Only, in order to become friends, the creature has to take Oliver to his world behind the screen. This is such an imaginative premise, and I really enjoyed this movie because of it. Equally, some of the jump scares were just as creative.
Hello.
I've seen a lot of horror movies in my day, and I can usually see a jump scare coming from a mile away. But there were a few in here that legit got me, and I was really impressed. I didn't find them to be just a bunch of fake outs and cheap shots like most horror movies. This also isn't a no-stakes movie. A lot of movies of this nature would have the main characters beat the monster and then live happily ever after. But the ending here is actually pretty dark, and we get an unexpected sacrifice that gives the ending a lot of weight. Also, in the ending, we get a good look at the monster, and it has gray skin with long fingers, and it really reminded me of E.T. And then I remembered. Amblin. Steven Spielberg. This is a remake of E.T. A young boy meets a creature from another world who wants to be their friend, only this is like a horror spin-off of that. Okay, I'm going to go into the bad now, and it might seem like a lot, but keep in mind that none of this is bad enough to make this movie a bad experience. They do stick out though, and quite frankly, they held this movie back from being great. The dialogue is at times unbearable. For some reason, the characters say things that we all already know, just to make sure we know it. It's made very obvious, pretty early in the movie, that Oliver is autistic. He only talks using his phone, and he fidgets when he gets upset. He even has a personal aide in school.
Make sure you pay attention to the lesson, okay?
But as if that wasn't enough, we get the dialogue.
He's autistic, dude.
We even understand that because of his condition, Oliver is probably the only kid in school that gets to use his cell phone in class, which would absolutely make some kids jealous. But just in case you couldn't pick up on that, we get the dialogue to fill in the blanks.
How come Oliver still gets to use his phone in class, but you took mine away?
At one point, Oliver's upset and he starts humming the SpongeBob song. Now, we all know the tune, and we've all been watching Oliver watch SpongeBob the entire movie. I'm sure we could put two and two together, but just in case you couldn't,
Is that the SpongeBob song?
the dialogue really undermines the great visual storytelling that this movie already has. It already does such a great job at like show don't tell, which is basically conveying what you need to know visually. And to have it also told to you is just annoying, and it makes the characters seem stupid and artificial. Now, the kids in this movie, this is a weird situation. On one hand, I'm glad that they actually cast kids, because it gives it more of a punch to see kids in danger.
What is happening? Oh my god!
I feel like the safer route from a production standpoint would have been just to write them as a bunch of high schoolers and then cast them as a bunch of adults. For some reason, this has become common in horror movies, even though it's stupid. Anyway, they didn't go this route. They actually cast kids. But I think their original plan was to use a bunch of high schoolers. The dialogue and overall dynamic between all of these elementary school kids is just so high school. Some of the kids are bullies and they don't like Oliver. Now, typically, elementary school bullies would just call you names. Maybe they'd push you down if they were really brave. But these kids conspire against Oliver. One of the kids acts like he wants to be his friend and he talks him into meeting him after school in the field.
Hey, what's up?
Sorry, Patrick.
Do you want to come hang out with us?
Only when he shows up, all the kids are there and they take his cell phone.
Hey, I can't believe he actually fell for it. Of course he did. He's such a loser.
What group of 10-year-olds could pull this off? Not to mention, what group of 10-year-olds could get away with leaving school without their parents? Altogether, I like this movie. It's a clever spin on a classic that has enough of its own original elements that it could go unnoticed. In fact, if it wasn't for the Amblin logo in the beginning, I probably would have never noticed. And I really love the premise. You know, the idea that a monster comes from your smart device, it rings close to home, especially considering how much time I spend on my devices personally. And the visual storytelling was fantastic. Unfortunately, it was ruined by the dialogue. And that's what held this movie back the most, was just the awkward, descriptive dialogue. At no point was I ever confused about the logistics of this movie. The problem is, I don't think the writers had any confidence that the viewers could figure it out.
Is that the SpongeBob song?
Thanks for watching, everyone. As always, I appreciate your views, and let's not just watch movies. Let's talk about them too.